call the meeting to order of the Newtown Township Finance Committee, September 20th, 2023. Call the meeting to order. We're going to do a roll call. Larry Fisher. Here. Lisa Pascal.
Here.
Scott, I apologize. I can never remember your last name.
Trotter.
Scott Trotter.
Here.
Ed Napol's here. Alice Sukis is absent. Okay, good. Next, we have to do a moment of silence. Pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Perfect. Okay, first order of business is we need to consider item number 4. Considering approval of the agenda.
So moved.
I'll second. Are there any objections, changes, issues with the agenda? We hear none. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. Public comment for agenda items only. I see no public in the room. So therefore, there was no public comment for the agenda. Item number 6.1. Consider approving the minutes from the August 16th, 2023 meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Lisa Pascal makes a motion to approve the minutes. I make a second. Are there any updates to that minute, the minutes of the August 16th meeting? I hear none. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. Accepted. Reports. We have Steve Neese, our township manager, is not present at the meeting today. He's out on personal matters. I don't know whether or not Yvonne Bullock, our finance director, has any comments that she would want to pass along herself or from Steve, or should we just table what we normally get in terms of finance committee update, a financial information update from the township? Yeah. Right, right. The summary. Yeah. The pretty glossies. Yes. Great. Thank you, Yvonne. Next order of business is new business item 8.1, update on the budget. Obviously without Steve here, but I don't know what, maybe you could fill us in a little bit in terms of what's going on, Yvonne.
Yeah. Yesterday.
Yeah, the second meeting in September. Yeah. So things are getting pushed back, but that's.
That was only back up. Like I said,
Mhm.
Ron was ready for it, but.
Right. Right.
Like, so I won't.
Right. And I know Steve starts that process early, just anticipating that there may be glitches along the way that cause delays. Yeah.
Like I said.
Great. Any other questions for Yvonne? I see none. Okay, we'll move on to old business, our favorite topic. Without Alex here and without Steve, I think it's fair to say that as a committee, I can be overruled, but as a committee, I don't think we should be issuing a formal recommendation at the conclusion of our discussion today. I think it's more appropriate, given the change of, given the differences of opinion from some of the committee members. I think we should use this as an opportunity to air out people's thoughts directionally on how we could better communicate our complex problem. And with that, I'm just going to open it to the floor to Scott or Lisa or Larry and let them jump in. Since I guess myself and Alex have kind of at least put some guidelines down. Scott, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, well, it seems like the whole issue comes around how we're gonna pay.
Yeah.
It's either your tax. So. Yeah, and there was something about, I remember Steve talking about some of the other towns. They got into issue. Haverford.
I think there's a case in Westchester right now that is arguing that it's really a fee, it can't be a tax.
No, they imposed a fee, but it's really a tax. And because it's a tax, it can't be imposed on tax exempts.
Right, okay.
And so you have the equity issue comes right out. You have one property owner that could be a tax exempt, that's a contributor to the issue, and you have another property owner that's a taxable property owner, and they're going to be funding the issue. So directionally, we've gone back and forth, and it would appear, given the normal nature of litigation like this, municipal litigation, that this is going to drag on for quite a few years. That's the prediction at this point in time, before there would be presumably a final legal resolution. Can you impose a fee that would be imposed on both taxable and exempt property owners?
Sounds like to me that would be something that impacts everybody. I should. Churches, whatever, that have property.
And I think collectively, if all five members would hear, they would agree with you. The issue that we have is timing. Should we sit on the sidelines and not do anything for the next couple of years while this litigation pans out? Or should we do, is it fair to do something in the interim that we are permitted to do, and that's raise a tax and start the process and get the township, at least the taxable township real estate owners, on board with the fact that there's going to be revenue raising, regardless of what you call it. There's going to be revenue raising associated with this issue. The issue is such of a magnitude that there's going to be revenue raising. That's really the dilemma that we don't have an easy solution to this, because we can't, if we knew the litigation was going to be solved a year from now, it may be, well, let's wait. But then if we sit and wait and the problem becomes exasperated, then we're in a worse possible position. So we're kind of speculating on the future.
Do we know? So I guess the point. 5 years. What happened? So figure one of the questions that's going to be asked. If we wait, but it's.
Mhm.
Safety. So we're like, the number one is safety. And stormwater challenges, have caused issues with infrastructure and, aside from getting into people's homes and things like that, there's real safety concerns. With just, I think there was a pothole at one point that is just a specific example of where kids get on the bus every day and the road is sinking in, having to do with somebody.
The issue is, back to what you raised. When over the last year and a half, as we spoke to other municipalities that headed into this, there was one unanimous comment that they made. Do not do anything without a public relations campaign of what you're doing. Or you will run into a firestorm. So therefore, you've got to view it as, they recommended that you view it as a two-pronged approach. What your revenue raising mechanism will be, and how are you going to communicate that? Don't do one without the other. And so that thought obviously resonated with me a lot into what I put together in terms of the draft. That, Jerry.
Green, oh, there it is.
There you go.
Do you know if any taxpayers, like not for profit, regular taxpayers have brought any suits against any townships because you have it as a tax? And therefore,
Oh, an equity argument of tax versus a fee was falling on us, discrimination type issue.
right, because let's face it, our not-for-profits in this township are pretty
Yeah.
healthy financially.
And they're pretty significant.
You forgot Dunway, but I won't. So you don't know that.
Oh, I am not aware of that. That has not come up, but the counter argument from the taxable side of the house, not aware of that. But what you're now doing is opening the door to, it gets beyond financing. You have embedded in all of this is the legal implications of an action or an inaction. Again, playing in my little mind that legal input on this minefield is pretty critical. And that's really beyond the scope of this committee. We really can't make a recommendation regarding that particular issue without engaging legal counsel to give us advice. So we become circular. Larry, I'll let you jump in.
I was talking about earlier, the legal issue is that there isn't the precedent. Somebody is going to sue, no matter what we do. That's my sense. If you, other than a pure real estate tax, that's just a couple more mills that the township's going to designate for stormwater flood control. I say if you try to put a fee, the nonprofit's going to sue, the homeowners association, Ellis Preserve, they're doing state-of-the-art stormwater right now. And if we just put a fee on them, they're going to say that's not equitable. So, but again, Ed's right. If we wait for the legal precedent to be done, we're never going to start. And
Right.
Ed, my question on the paper that you wrote up, which I thought was really interesting. You want to raise some money now to do more formal investigation on the legal issues and to better educate the residents?
Three-pronged. Number one, to get legal and engineering in the room and to get current information where they can provide current information. Number two, we have a huge amount of data that's missing. We don't have it. Example, in Alex's transmission, most recent transmission, he talked about doing a tax or a fee, regardless of what we call it, just an imposition based upon lot size, square footage. We do not have that information. Township does not possess that level of information. We have assessed value taxable properties. We do not have any detailed information for HOAs, or what we have is wrong. We know it's wrong, as well as for tax exempts. We have nothing for tax exempts. And we believe what limited information we have on lot size is not correct. It came from the county. And it is, Rich LaFata punched holes in it immediately when he got it and said, this is not reliable. It's not right. So you've got to basically look at this and say, square one, if we're going to head down a path towards a fee, follow Alex's suggestion, and you're going to do it on lot size, you've got to get to, okay, in order not to be sued, we actually have to have a detailed survey done of every township property to determine the lot size. Okay, hello, dollars, ding, ding, ding. Then you get into, okay, are we going to consider impervious coverage? Or are we just going to say no? Back to Larry's point, if we have Ellis Preserve with a stormwater management system, they're going to say, wait a minute, I'm not getting credit for this. So should we give it to Ellis Preserve, but not to Lister or not to XYZ? So you open a door that you're treating parties differently. You've got to come up with a clear path as at the onset as to how you're going to approach this. And what are the hazards? If you should decide we're not going to do impervious coverage, that you're going to be able to take on Ellis and say, we could lose. And this could disrupt our plans, and we'd have to go back and do another survey for impervious coverage, more money. So you see what I'm getting at? So I see outside costs as being our biggest immediate impediment. And we have the ARPA money is still about, I'm going to guess, Yvonne may know. How much is left in ARPA? About $1 million, okay? About $1 million is left in ARPA. That has to be spent, I believe, Yvonne, that's got to be spent by the end of 2024. Okay, has to be spent, and there's limitations on where that money can be spent. So now you get into, can I use ARPA money, go out and start a survey to actually get lot size? Or is that not permissible under the rules of how that ARPA money was be granted? Legal advice on what you can or cannot use the ARPA funds for. Now, that may be a fairly straightforward, simple answer. It may not. So then folks would say, wait a minute, we've got such a complexity here, and we still have $1 million that we can spend on construction in 2024. We can buy a little bit more time. You get into, do we want to wait a year and really hash this out and use the rest of the ARPA money in 2024 on construction, rather than rushing into a decision to get a tax at the end of 2023? The approach when I huddled with Steve was, our thought was, we know we have a large amount of data, and then never mind construction, ongoing construction that's going on, a large amount of data that's missing. Let's use the tax to fund that data gather and legal advice and engineering advice. We have a survey of what the magnitude of the cost problem is. It's 3 years old, but hasn't been inflation adjusted. We know from the last meeting that I did at the Board of Supervisors, township engineer it's clearly said the cost estimate that was done, the current magnitude of the problem is greater than what that number is, but would not speculate on what that new number is. So we don't even have a reasonably up-to-date estimate on what the total construction cost is going to be to fix the problems that we know exist, never mind new ones that may pop up. More complexity on top of the pile. So, again, more questions, Larry, any other real thoughts? I feel like we've done a disservice to the township if we, to the board, if we don't give them some type of a recommendation in 2023. And to come back and say, well, we don't know, we're still studying, and I'm kind of like, but then again, are we out of bounds in terms of what I've recommended here? Or alternatively, what Alex has recommended is going with a fee. But again, right now, we can't go with a fee based upon acreage because we don't have data. We can only go on a fee based upon assessed value. That's called a tax. Can't call a dog a cat. So, yeah, we're kind of stuck with what we can do presently. And we have a whole lot of work and information has to be gathered to kind of at least generate a path.
So the tax. Not for the
Principally, correct, Scott. Principally, I didn't want to, it's now in public. I didn't want to come out and say that directly because I knew we had $1 million of roughly $1 million of ARPA funds for the construction side of the house. It was really fund the data gathering, the legal services, the engineering services, the actual site work that needs to be done on a property by property basis.
You do have the ability to charge a fee based on a standard fee, one fee per lot in the township.
That is correct.
You still have the
John,
ability to do
that is correct, John. That was one of the analysis that we did early on, Lisa and I. We know the number of lots of taxable property owners. We could do today, the Board of Supervisors could enact a flat fee, and it's roughly $180. That would generate $1 million. We could do that today. It wouldn't be based on lot size. It would be a flat fee per lot.
that. Tax exempt.
No. That is, it's taxable. So if we did it on the taxable, on the tax exempts, and again, calling it a fee, that's just a cat versus a dog. There's a marginal difference. The reason why, Scott, is there's approximately, and this is a year and a half old, approximately 5,600 taxable parcels in the township. There were 66 tax exempt parcels. You can do the math. The differential is about $1 or $2 in terms of whether or not this charge is imposed on both taxable and exempts or just on the taxables. Now, you're raising an interesting point that I didn't think about. One of the things that this committee may want to consider is if we're going to use a funding mechanism to gather data and use the 2024 year as data gathering, then, okay, outside estimate, what would that number be? Don't use any of this money for construction. Use it for data gathering. In my analysis here, I pulled out, just out of the air, I pulled out $500,000. Okay. Based upon what Lisa and I did, that translates into roughly a $90 charge for all taxable property. A single line item charge of $90. That $90 will generate $500,000 in revenue. So
Yep.
you could say, we want to defer on the actual funding plan and use this $90 charge to data gather.
I do that in a second. I just think that if you look at
Yeah.
this thing in the big picture, just try to go to
Plan,
the plan, where you get
the data.
public buy-in. And
Right, the buy, so you could do the communications.
so you get people used to paying for something.
That's what Steve Neese and I talked about. You're not going to get any level of community participation until they see it. If you talk about it, they're like, okay, I don't care. Talk about it all you want.
Right. Exactly.
Now, it's kind of a
Except
quiet
the people
point.
that where all this water is flowing.
Well, yeah, except for the
Right.
ones that are
Yeah.
calling Steve every time there's a
Yeah.
2-inch rain.
Right.
Right, he's on their speed dial. That's why we talked about in the draft, and it's kind of. We didn't want to highlight it, but by calling this charge a fund. What that does is, we believe, got to get legal advice, but we believe that will permit the township to have that be a line item on the tax bill, that's going to go out in February of 2024, and will require the township to set aside and separately account for those monies, like the hydrant and the street light. So that way, it won't become commingled, and it won't just become part of the process, versus embedding it
Mhm.
in the real estate tax and the millage, where it's kind of hidden, and it defeats the purpose of alerting the township.
Second. They gotta feel a little pain,
Correct. A little bit of
a
pain,
little bit of pain,
not a hammer.
not a hammer. Bring out people to actually get involved and think about this process. Look at the real issue.
Right.
So,
The data, the legal and the data.
hey, we got a big issue, studying it, raising this money to study it,
Right,
get ready.
right.
Right, and it's information gathering, so you don't get the potential arguments of this isn't applicable to me.
Well, this isn't fair.
Because this
Yeah.
project is in a different neighborhood or.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Right,
It's every neighbor.
right.
Exactly.
If you're on the high ground, you're like, what's stormwater problem?
Mhm.
But is this going to be a challenge for the supervisors? Because no matter what you call it, it's still, you can follow what you want, it's still a duck. It's still,
Oh, it's a tax.
or a fee, but
Yeah.
it's money out of everybody's pocket.
That is correct.
And are they aware this is coming?
Yes, our presentations that we've done with the board, and they know the magnitude of the total issue. So I believe Leonard is reasonably aware of complexities and the lack of data. But they came back after we did the presentation, I'm gonna say in July. They came back and looked and said, can you give us a recommendation? And hence, this is what we did. So obviously, I went for gusto, but why not? But I think, Larry, I'll speak for you. I mean, oh, you should speak. Directionally, are you leaning towards what Scott is leaning towards?
What I'm hearing. I didn't get it before. Yeah, put something out there. If you have a meeting next week, you'll get 12 people here. If you send somebody a bill that has $100 on it, they'll call. And
And you can
And
tell them,
then-
yeah, you
and
come in. and
They
you
might
in.
come into a
Come
meeting.
into the town hall.
So I think that's, and I think it's a way to start, and it's one that you could stop and change. 'Cause
Right.
It's, the
It's a
fee
fee.
could be stopped
Right.
immediately, so
Next
we're
year.
not saying that
Right.
it's forever.
Yeah.
The only question I have though, on a fee, the utility fee, the electric and the hydrant, the nonprofits pay.
Yes.
Why wouldn't, I mean, again,
And that's-
it's a small amount.
No, but that's a great point. And there's a legal reason why, and it's part of the litigation with Westchester. But when you oppose a hydrant fee or a street light fee, that is assessed on specific properties that are geographically within a certain zone of that hydrant or that streetlight. So if you have a neighborhood that doesn't have hydrants and streetlights, you don't pay that fee.
I know with the streetlights, you had to be within a certain distance of the streetlight.
Correct.
I wasn't sure on the hydrant.
Yeah.
It's the same way on a
Yeah.
hydrant?
So it's.
Or does
it's-
everybody-
It's tied to that specific geographic, from what I understand, tied to that specific geographic area. So it's not just for the general benefit of the township.
I mean, are there properties in Newtown that are not within a distance of a hydrant?
I believe so.
Mine is not.
Really? And you don't pay the hydrant tax fee?
I haven't looked at, my wife does that, but
Yeah.
I'll look at
Yeah,
it.
yeah, why don't you look at it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
but part of what you said, it's not a lot of money.
No,
It, you know, if it's $100 fee and there's 100 properties, you know, it's not a lot of
it's
money.
more than
But
that.
part of it is principle of it, you
Right.
know, and you'd almost want to say to these not-for-profits, even if they're not required to, hey, don't you think you should contribute this $100?
Yeah, you can afford
Now,
that.
they might not want to, because then
Well,
they set a precedent.
Yeah,
for
yeah,
the next one.
yeah, call the
No,
lawyer.
I think this notion of doing something that has a tangible consequence.
Visible.
Yep.
Versus hiding it.
Yep. And especially if you want to do something soon, but to John's point, and Yvonne, this is not a good tax year. You know, the budget's gonna
Yeah.
be tough.
Yeah.
Because of, I mean, what we've seen already presented with the pensions going up, it's gonna be a tough.
And the interim, the transient type of
Yep.
fee revenue from the permits
Mhm.
and from the real estate transfer tax is going down. That's really what the gap is. All right, this has been, Lisa, anything else you can think of?
The only thing I'm thinking about is maybe, you know, because we do have a lot of information now, and I think this was a good summary of it. But maybe we need to organize it more in the way of like questions that could arise and how to respond. Maybe that gives a different perspective to
Well,
the
that-
Board of Supervisors, or like, you know, helps them with.
Well, one of the things that I'm still thinking about, let's just say and go ahead. And we impose a $90, I'll call it a charge, 2024. And that's gonna go on the tax bills in February. Or a separate mail, TBD. That will attract reaction. Okay? Who is going to handle that reaction? Is this committee willing to undertake that? Is the Board of Supervisors willing to undertake that? Is the Township manager going to be charged with handling that and explaining that? So once you open the door, you've got to have who the responsible people are going to be. That are going to have the knowledge in order to be able to adequately, and correctly, and accurately respond to the reaction. Can't do one without the other. I believe you can't do one without the other. So that's why I'm still feel fairly strongly that you've got to resolve who's gonna own this our entire process going forward. Now, again, I don't see many hands going up as volunteers.
I'm fine with that. But is that why you're calling for
Yes,
that flood
Yes.
control advisory?
yes.
Yeah, I don't think it's this committee, this group of people. I think it's as part of the process to designate a group. I don't think it's the municipal authority either. I think it would be the board creating a group that's going to do nothing but address this whole going forward.
A plan.
Yep, I think that, and, you know.
Because we don't have a plan.
That's
Steve,
right.
Steve would be the township manager, who would, you know, have to be the head of this, I think, until they.
Yeah, but that's part of the dilemma.
Yeah.
Because think about it. But what we just discussed and all the permutations and combinations and all the legal issues and the issues that none of us have thought about at this point. In addition to his current role and his support on the municipal authority. I mean, you can stretch somebody only so far. Now, granted, Steve has institutional knowledge. But that can be transitioned. That's part of what I think the board has to resolve.
Yeah.
Are they gonna put it on Steve or are they gonna put it on somebody else? That's a board decision. We shouldn't be making that decision.
No, no,
I'm
no.
highlighting the issues.
Oh, no. We're not a decision making process.
Right. Yeah, we can provide advice, but what you're getting at is, at this point, the logical person with institutional knowledge is Steve.
I
But
don't
think
even-
about the complexity of this project.
We don't have to make that recommendation. That's, yeah, that,
Got it. Anything else you can think of at this point?
Yeah, I still. Gotta move forward, gotta start the impetus. This problem's not going away. Gotta address it, but we don't have a plan, so we need to start working on it.
Or the board has to decide, do they want, maybe the way to approach it is, does the board want this finance committee to take on this undertaking of developing this plan? Or alternatively, is it more appropriate to use another committee to be established that includes the various participants?
that's almost I don't want to say that's the secondary problem. You know, is the board going to be willing? Actually, that may be the easier problem, to set up another committee as opposed to making the decision to say, there's a $90 charge on next year's tax bill. And that clock is running really fast, because if we don't make a recommendation until October, the budget process is that much further
Yeah.
along.
Yes.
So I think, you know, we definitely want to communicate this discussion to Steve, so Steve can alert them that come October, this is, you know, even though it's
The
not.
fact, I agree with you, Larry, but I think the board is well aware or is anticipating, without putting a number in a slot, that that this committee is going to come back with a recommendation that's going to cause a consequence of raising additional revenue. Right?
But I think to get them the word, you know, if we can give them a number that we think we're going to recommend to them sooner rather than later.
Oh, yeah, okay.
You know, if we're.
Oh, we were, when I huddled with Steve on this, we were clearly thinking that we were gonna have a follow-up presentation at the board meeting before all this happened with Steve being out of touch and back and forth with Alex. We were thinking of presenting, I was thinking of presenting at the next board meeting this coming Monday. But I don't think there's enough of time now. We don't have Steve back in place, and it would be better with Alex. But if not this coming Monday, the following meeting,
Mhm.
we would be advising them, if we had concurrence of directionally, this is what we are,
Right.
this is a proposed recommendation.
Yep.
Okay, And then let Steve and Alex, who are missing, give their input, because I'd want it to be a consensus. I think it's gonna be too involved to do this in writing. I may have to let Alex know, maybe him and I could talk on the phone. So he can get the genesis of this without being bored to death by sitting through watching this tape. That directionally, what we're thinking. And seeing if we have both Steve's support and Alex support as directionally, if I'm not putting words in anybody's mouth here, if we think a $90 charge that would be imposed in the 2024 year, that would be imposed on, here's the question, ding, 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 is it going to be imposed on just taxable property owners? Or is it going to be imposed on every property? Now that one, we may need to have the solicitor tell us what is permissible as a snapshot to get that done.
We should take the easiest road.
Well, that tells me then it only goes against taxable
Yeah,
property.
if you wanna. Hey, I think you probably could get a legal opinion pretty easy on that,
I agree.
and it's probably gonna be taxable only. And just, if you wanna have something for next year, just pull the trigger on that. Again, it can be changed.
Mhm.
But I think,
The good
again,
thing is, as far as Alex and Steve go, they'll be able to hear all this discussion.
Yeah.
You know, they'll can review that tomorrow. If they want. Yeah.
No, that was what I'm gonna direct him to do, and then we can talk separately. John, you're gonna say something?
does Stephen know, or maybe Yvonne knows, what is the township going to raise property taxes next year?
It has not officially been decided upon. The latest revenue estimates that I was made aware of for the pattern of what's taking place currently in this current year is that both the permitting fee and the real estate transaction tax fee
We're down.
fees are down below what they were projected, which was anticipating a reduction. So they are further down than where they were expected to be. And there is no present indication that that's a temporary phenomenon and they will head back to their levels of prior years. So as a consequence of that, there's likelihood, again, I'm just speaking as a wire boy, that there may have to be action at the end of the year by the board where there's going to be a gap versus the budget.
So the point I was going to make is that we talk about $90 like it's not a lot of money, but it's 9%, I think, of the average person's township tax. Right? Isn't the average tax $1,000 roughly? Am I? No, for the township.
I don't know that number, what the average is. We can go back, maybe Lisa and I, Lisa, I'm sorry, I'm doing this, yeah.
No, that's-
Maybe we'll go back and look at when Rich did all that analytics.
You know, Yvonne?
Yeah.
The average tax, because when you don't think of your total tax bill, think of the township tax, which is the smallest of the three.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I know what you're saying. But if it's not this year,
Oh, I
It's next year.
understand, but I'm
So,
talking
you know.
about headline risk for the supervisors.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
we're saying
We don't,
just expert, just $90, but I thought, and again, I could be smoking crack, but
I
No,
can
I
get that.
wasn't.
I think I could
Yeah.
get that number.
yeah.
So, yeah, the $90 has been in my head a little bit about maybe being high. You know, if there's a way, maybe we could even lower that, that might make it more palatable. I think one of the townships we interviewed started with like a $7. Yeah, wasn't
You know, I
It's a
think,
very-
was it Warminster?
Yeah, it was a very small fee.
Yeah, and then, but then they used it as, you know, putting the toe in the water, and then, obviously the following year it went up, so
Right,
kind of like, okay. And, but then I believe in my recollections, and that was a fee, that they knew that, they just wanted to soften the blow,
right,
but they knew that that number was not going to be sufficient to fund.
right.
And so they were, you know, basically, yeah, we're gonna raise it next year. I don't know. My thought is that this 2024 charge should be viewed as a one-time charge and sold as a one-time charge to do the sole purpose of gathering legal, engineering, and informational data in order to make a formal recommendation in the following year. For the applicable for the following year. And the amount, we can go back and forth with, but from what I know, I think what you recall with Rich, we have huge issues with the data. And we're gonna have to, I believe, we're gonna have to hire professionals that do this for a living with drones and everything else to gather explicit information on lot size, and if it's determined by a responsible person, impervious coverage, which is a complexity all of itself. That's gonna require money.
As long as people are not led to believe that that's the end.
Correct. That, and it gets back to, you're actually right. And then so wait a minute, you said this is a one-time charge. John's raised this before. Now you're coming back with, oh, now you're calling it a fee. Right, so you've got to, this is part of a process.
Dip our toe in this, getting, you know, information. Big problem.
So maybe considering doing a lower amount initially and then not, you know, maybe that helps to dampen that perception that it's going to go away, that it's a one-time thing.
I think my comment about being one time is a bad comment. I think we've got to say this. Revenue raising in order to address this problem is going to be in front of us now for a long time. And to say it's a
Yeah.
one time is a bad,
Yeah, you don't want to-
bad recommendation. This is an interim
It's the
step
initial.
to gather data.
Initial step.
That's all this is. And we don't know the mechanics and the dollar amounts of what any final plan would look like. This is intended to give responsible people data points in order to make a formal recommendation.
That plus the second thing is form that.
Yes, well, I'm gonna say it would appear that there needs to be in place a mechanism that can communicate with the public at large who are affected by this and to respond and to address their issues and concerns. Is that going to be appropriate for the Board of Supervisors to undertake directly? Is it alternatively, do they want to charge the Finance Committee? Or alternatively, do they want to establish a separate committee? Now, I can tell you, my personal observation is I would clearly go with the third option because I want the engineer and the solicitor directly involved in all the discussions. Hence, ding, 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 you're running an hourly meter for all that incremental time by the third parties, by the engineer and by the solicitor, and that's totally appropriate. Ding, ding, ding. You've got a revenue base in order to fund those incremental costs. All right, I think I have enough that I can do the 2.0 version of a recommendation, a proposed recommendation, okay? Subject to Lisa giving me if we use $90, and that would be my preference, personal preference, that the relationship of that to the average taxpayer, not imposed on the exempt property owners. And my proposed recommendation would include that the board could separately consider engaging the solicitor to review whether or not this charge for 2024 could be imposed on tax exempt property owners. And let them address that. And I think they're going to say at this point in time, we're not going to go down that road.
All right. Good one.
This was productive.
Good.
A year and a half worth of work. There's approximately 5,600 taxable parcels in the township. And and again, this was based upon, I believe it was 2021 data. When Rich did this analysis, and there were 66 tax exempt parcels. So we're not missing out on a large number if we do it on a per parcel basis.
Right.
Again, I'm sorry I'm doing this. Okay, what do you do with an HOA? What do you do with an Ellis Preserve?
The total township budget for this year was $11 million.
Correct. With the real estate tax being approximately 5.3 million is my recollection.
So 5.3 million, 5,600 parcels. That's where my number came.
Oh.
So
Oh.
1 million is about 10%.
Well, when we did the numbers, I know 16% was the number to raise $1 million. From the analysis that was done 2
Right,
years
yeah.
ago, to raise $1 million was 16%. And I also know that if we did it on a per lot basis, based upon the number of taxable lots 2 years ago, it was $180, $179.
Right, so $90, yeah,
Correct.
right.
Without having to hire actuaries and accountants to come to whether or not it's $87.27. Just pick a flat number. Based on, and this is how we arrived at it, period.
So again, what you have is just the township supervisors have to deal with optics of all this, that if there's budget pressure anyway, and then you have another fee coming
Mhm.
through that.
That's why we want to make
Yeah,
the
exactly.
clearly, that's why we want speed with the recommendation so that it can be processed into the hodgepodge. It's just the complexity of what the 2024 budget is going to be and what the real estate tax portion of that's going to be.
You know, part of the issue may be the assessed value. I think the average assessed value now in the township is between 250 and 300,000. So the $90 fee on the $300,000 or the $500,000 property is the same $90 fee on the $200,000 assessed.
That is
And
correct.
that's so,
And that gets back to Alex's
Yeah.
equity argument.
yeah,
That it's they should be at least. Categorized or affected that somebody with $200,000 shouldn't be paying the same as somebody with $1 million assessed value. Okay, mechanically, what can you do to do that? One of the things you can do is you could do it based upon, and again, now we're creating complexity. As compared to simple solution. You could say each $100,000 of assessed value or $50,000 of assessed value. But then you could have a dollar amount. Okay, and that dollar amount may be $5. Or it may be $50 for each 100,000 of assessed value. So somebody with 200,000 of assessed value, right? or $25. And then somebody with $1 million is gonna pay 5 times more than that.
Well,
And
that's
we
why
did
I
that,
think,
we did a model showing that. So that would definitely help with the lower.
Well, it helped with the equity argument.
Well, I think that might be. some
that's part of the next
for-
step.
Yeah, I think
That's why. To
School,
get
when you actually
something
get into the
done, and it's
plan-
gonna cost money to get to that next step.
Right.
Maybe it doesn't have to be the $90. Figure out to get to the next
Right.
equitable step.
Correct.
But,
Yeah.
yeah, I think, $90 fee, my sense, but this is not gonna be a good tax year. You know, they kicked the bucket last year.
Yeah.
$200,000. So it's gonna be. We can make the recommendation and then it's for them to decide.
Right.
Yep.
I mean,
Now,
and
I
from
wanna
an
get-
equity, real quick, from an equity standpoint, though. It also turns out, if I remember correctly, that many of the. People that are benefiting from the stormwater improvements that are coming. Are people in older neighborhoods that have
Absolutely.
lower assessed value.
That is correct.
Absolutely.
So that even
that is-
though they may be paying more,
That is
Or
on
also
on a
the-
relative basis, but you are correct.
From a bigger picture, you're right. If the newer houses are the more expensive houses
And guess what? They're at the top of the hill.
and they're, if you build a new standalone house today, you have
Yeah.
current stormwater management
Oh, yeah. You
built
got
into their house.
slope,
So,
you got all those
yeah.
issues. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
So that's, again, part of the perhaps education or, explanation.
I am- I want,
But we gotta get
okay.
started.
well, that's part of, well, again, I'm glad we talked about this issue with the equity on the assessed value. Because if, again, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth. If we head down a path of a flat charge per parcel. And right now, I'm going to tentatively propose that that's $90. It doesn't address the equity argument as to the relative property owners, but it's still, in the overall scheme of things, it's still a nominal dollar, but in a presumably a tax revenue year, a tax raising year. If we should recommend now that it really should be an increment based upon assessed values. So a property with $200,000 is going to be double the charge of the 100,000. That's going to require a little bit of time and effort, and we may lose the opportunity of imposing it in 2024. I think it's going to take a little bit of time to come up with a number that we can say unequivocally is accurate and we can stand behind.
I don't like that. I think that's absolutely true when you're looking at plan. But to make a, guy up on top of the hill versus some guy else, we're all in this together. So that fee to do the,
The data
do
gathering,
data
legally
gathering,
data, yeah,
that's like everybody's.
right. Well,
Yeah.
the whole town, the value of the all
me,
township
that's
properties
how
are assuming are going to be affected positively. But again, you can hear the roars. So you gotta be
And
able
you
to
gotta make a
say,
decision and move on,
correct,
Put
correct,
it out
ain't
there,
going away,
Right,
ain't going away.
ain't going away, so.
All right, so.
Right, and
if-
I think we also need to go back to this question of urgency and what is the urgency again? Because that's something Scott brought up right away, and maybe we need to tighten that
I'm
argument.
not sure what you mean by that.
Because that I think a lot of this is timing is very important right now. We want to
Yes.
take action. quickly.
If we're gonna
So we
raise
can get more
revenue, if
information.
we're gonna raise revenue in 2024, excuse me. If we need to incur costs,
Mhm.
question is, do we want to defer action? Or do we want to raise revenue immediately to fund the development of a plan,
Information gathering.
right? Legal, professional services.
Right.
I'm still, I
If we
apologize, I
wait 5
cut you
more
off.
years, it's gonna be it's gonna, the stormwater management is gonna go from 10 million to 30 million.
Right.
So we better get on this now, so blah, blah, blah.
Right, like
We
points
can't
like
go-
that, where you could say, you know, somebody can understand quickly why it is that we can't sit on this for another year.
And that's why we're forming this committee, so that we can, you know, get to the bottom of this in the next year.
We as a group, or I don't think anybody else can move this project forward without the expenditure of significant dollars.
Right.
We could talk about
Yeah,
it for another year.
Yeah,
We'd be right where we are
that's
now,
right. We're not making any further
Without-
progress.
having the ability to hire professionals to get you the answers to
Advise,
the
right.
questions that you want.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct. All right,
And why does the community need this? That's the bigger question that
well,
you might.
I mean,
you might have
Grant,
to-
no, I hear you, but you know, I mean, I thought we did give the township by the communications that went out in the newsletter and the various other places. I think folks are peripherally aware that this is an issue. Whether or not they know the magnitude of the dollars, no, they do not. Okay, so again, in order to bring them in to really understand the problem and to vent their frustrations and anger. Oh yeah, there'll be a lot of those. Yeah, Steve and I talked about this at length.
You're spending.
The
on
only
people's
way-
money.
The only way to get township, we believe the only way to get direct input is they have to see it. They have to see it. If they don't see it, we'll be spinning wheels, saying
Right.
on and on and on. And this is a mechanism that will facilitate that communication. That we are what, and then what we heard from the other municipalities, absolutely. As soon as you open this door, they're gonna come running out, so.
What happens if we go to the supervisor and they say, you know what, we're gonna put this aside for right now?
They may,
Then we're
well,
done.
they may, they may.
That's their-
Absolutely.
that's
They
their
may.
decision.
But-
That's
but-
their
That's what they're
choice.
paid
That's
to do.
correct.
But are we giving them enough information to know the full impact of?
I
Yeah.
think we have,
I think so.
because I think it would, they know the dollar magnitude. They also know that those costs were before 8% inflation last year. They know this is not going away, that they know there's very little additional funding that's gonna come out of the sky. That's gonna fall in our laps. So they see the horizon. So they're, and they know the magnitude of the horizon. There's no secrets there. I don't think they need to know right now. Is the hard cost estimate for construction 20 million? Is it 25 million? Is it 30 million? They know it's an 8-digit number and that's, and that's all TBD.
Can they do a bond issue to fund this?
They asked about that. Ed Partridge at the Board of Supervisors meeting commented and said, this to me smells like a bond issue.
Yeah, and if that's the case, then the costs of all that studying you're talking about gets rolled into the costs of, that's gonna be raised. The total cost of the project.
That's correct, but one of the options they could do, and again. I'd rather give them what our committee would recommend, than
Exactly.
giving them all of the options. You're raising, John, one of the options could be. Just go ahead and do a bond issue, use that money to pay for all these incremental costs to develop the plan to fund the bond issue. I think in order to have that bond issue rated, you've got to have in place where the revenue is going to be to pay for it. So it kind of becomes, you got to get the plan in order to do the bond issue. And in order to get the plan, got to incur the costs. Who's going to pay the costs? Where are those revenues going to come from? So I don't think we can wait and use the bond issue vehicle up front. But that's my logic. you gotta, when you do the bond issue, the revenue to pay for it has to be embedded in that bond.
I think we're giving them, if we give them these two things, we're giving them the clarity that they see. We see they need to make that decision.
Right. Right, because again, we went to them looking for, can they give us direction? And they came back and said, no, give us a recommendation.
Right, so let's give them.
But just to circle back on the bond issue, if the number is $20 million. $20 million paid over 30 years at X% interest is where the revenue is going to come from.
That's correct. The
So-
amount of revenue is going to be needed.
Right, so that's where it's coming from.
Right, now, how it's going to be actually, right, it doesn't get to, how are you going to raise that? Is it going to be just part of the millage? You have to, when you do the bond offering, you've got to have the verbiage that says, this is the change that's going to be made to generate the revenue to pay for the bond. You need to know, is it $450,000 a year? If so, how is that going to be raised, or is it $800,000 a year? So you got to have all the ugly stuff in there. All right, let me, I got time, so what I'm gonna do, again, I don't want to cut this off,
No, I think.
and we're not
I think we made
making
all
a
the
formal,
progress, actually. I think we've-
we're not making a formal recommendation. I think what we're gonna do is, I'm gonna take a follow-up stab at the 2.0 version, based upon what we've got here, and I'll put that out to everybody. I'll direct folks that are not here today to go to the video. And I'll put that out to everybody. Today is Wednesday. I'm gonna put that out to everybody. Steve won't see it before I put it out. I'll put it out by end of day tomorrow. Okay? And then we can decide, and I think we should. Do we want to have a special meeting to follow up on people's thoughts on this that will enable us to make a formal recommendation to the Board of Supervisors before their meeting yes. Their Board of Supervisors are going to meet on October 9th. Okay. So we would need to meet again at some point next week. I would think by no later than a week from today.
No, but you have, I think, to be wrong, at least a week public notice for a special meeting. I think we could meet before October 9th, but I think they have to advertise a meeting.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm not
right.
positive.
No, I think you're right, Larry. I
Yeah.
think we have,
I don't know if it's a week notice or whatever for a public meeting.
you wouldn't know that, would you, Yvonne?
Yeah, it's,
Or business
yeah.
days?
So we could probably do it.
Okay, let's do this. I'm gonna draft a 2.0. Okay. Ed's action steps. Number one. Number two, I'll follow up on timing for a special meeting.
Suzanne can get you that information.
That's exactly what I was thinking, Larry. And then we'll then communicate if in fact it's logistically possible to do this before the October 9th board meeting, or should we really heading towards the second meeting in October? I don't know the answer to that question yet, but are folks generally in the neighborhood over the next 2 weeks?
Yeah. Actually, it's bad for me. Yeah. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm out. Central Pennsylvania. So, following week.
That would be the week of,
First week in October.
okay, so I'm just gonna say, because I want to have all five of us here. I don't know when Alex is getting. All right, so I'm gonna say first week October tentative. And hopefully that's enough of time. That it's worth doing as compared to let's do it at our meeting. See, I don't want to do it on the third Wednesday. I think it's gonna be too. It's not gonna give us enough of time if we have to make any final modifications in order to get it to the Board of Supervisors.
If you get this 2.0 out.
You know, and we can,
Clear.
you can meet. Get us put on the agenda. Even if we haven't, this is what.
Oh, that's a good idea.
You know, just get.
Yeah, we can
come
then
off
come in and say, we can need to pull that item.
So even if we met the day before or 2 days before, we're on the agenda. And then if we don't get it done, they just.
Yeah, we'll
call
just
us.
tell them we had to table it.
Yeah.
We'll be back to them in 2 weeks. Okay, that's a great idea. We at least to get a slot on the agenda.
Because again, that has to be published
Right,
so far in advance.
that's correct.
Okay.
That's the way to handle it.
Yeah. It's easy.
Rather than us spinning a whole lot of wheels,
Yeah.
just say we want a slot, we want to hold a placeholder.
Yep.
In the 10-9 meeting, and
Yep.
then we'll determine whether or not we'll
We
be
can make it.
ready.
Yep.
Ready, or we'll need to defer to the
And we
following.
won't do
meeting.
it unless we're ready.
Correct. Okay, thank you. That's exactly what needs to be done. Okay, I think we. Progress.
We beat that one.
We
All
have a
right.
plan.
Under old business 9.2, next item. I don't know whether or not there's any further follow-up that's required for third-party vendors. And without Alex here, who was running that, I think we want to table that as to whether or not we've completed that, or is that still open? Public comment, I see no public in the room. I think we're good with that. Items for the next agenda, and I would get this to be new items, new business as compared to our favorites. Any new items?
Probably just an update on the budget.
Well, that'll be part of
Yeah,
Steve's
Steve's
reports.
report,
I think that'll be part of Steve's reports. If not, I think it is 9:16, we will adjourn.